The number that caught my eye was $4,200. It was on a line item in a quarterly report my accountant had emailed me, filed under Professional Services, Contract Review. I didn't remember authorizing a contract review. I didn't remember anything costing $4,200 in the last quarter that wasn't payroll or rent. I run a small commercial landscaping company outside Raleigh, 16 employees, mostly HOA contracts, some light commercial. We do about 2.4 million in revenue a year. It's not a huge operation, but it's mine. I built it from one truck and a trailer in 2014. My accountant, a guy named Dennis, had been with me since year 2. He came recommended by my father-in-law, who had used him for decades. Dennis was the kind of accountant you wanted. Quiet, meticulous, wore the same gray cardigan in every meeting. He kept immaculate records. He sent me quarterly reports with color-coded tabs. He never missed a filing deadline in 9 years. My wife used to joke that Dennis was the most boring man in North Carolina. And I used to say, that's exactly what you wanted an accountant. So when I saw the $4,200 line item, I wasn't suspicious, I was just curious. I emailed Dennis and asked what the contract review was for. He emailed back within an hour. He said it was for a legal review of a commercial HOA contract we had signed in February, and that the attorney was a specialist he sometimes used for complex agreements. He attached an invoice. It looked legitimate. Letterhead, billing address in Charlotte, tax, ID, the works. I would have let it go. I almost did. But something about the attorney's name bothered me. I couldn't place it. I put the invoice on my desk and went back to work. 3 days later, I was at a Chamber of Commerce lunch, and I ran into a guy who did commercial real estate. We got to talking about legal fees, because that's what you talk about at Chamber of Commerce lunches, and I mentioned the attorney's name. He frowned. He said he'd never heard of him. He said he knew every commercial attorney in Charlotte, and he'd never heard that name in his life. I went back to my office that afternoon and looked the attorney up. No bar record, no website, no LinkedIn, no phone number that connected to anything. The billing address was a UPS. Not yet. Instead, I called a forensic accountant my business attorney recommended. Her name was Karen. She was in her 60s, had spent 20 years at the IRS before going private, and she didn't smile much. I brought her every quarterly report Dennis had sent me for the last 3 years. I brought her my bank statements. I brought her access to my QuickBooks. She told me it would take about 3 weeks. She told me not to say anything to Dennis. She told me to keep behaving normally. Behaving normally was the hardest thing I have ever done. Dennis came to my office that next Tuesday for our monthly check-in, like he had for 9 years. He sat across from me in his grey cardigan, and we went through payroll projections and tax planning for the rest of the year. He asked about my kids. He asked about my wife. I asked about his wife, who was going through chemo for the 2nd time. I made him coffee. I walked him to the door. I shook his hand. I went back to my office and sat at my desk, and I didn't move for 45 minutes. I just sat there. My hands were shaking. Karen called me exactly 19 days later. She asked if I could come to her office. I drove there that afternoon. She had my records spread out on a conference room table with color-coded tabs that reminded me of the ones Dennis used. She sat down across from me and she said, "I want to tell you the number first because everything else is going to be hard to hear and you need to be sitting down when I explain how he did it." The number was $187,000. That's what Dennis had stolen from me over 3 years. That's the word Karen used, elegant. He had been creating fake vendors, 10 or 12 of them, spread across my books, fake landscaping suppliers, fake equipment rental companies, fake legal services, fake subcontractors. He would process invoices to these fake vendors, show them as legitimate business expenses on my books, and the payments would go to bank accounts he controlled. The invoices looked real because he made them look real. He had been an accountant for 37 years. He knew exactly what an invoice needed to look like to not trigger any flags. He kept the amounts small, 3,000 here, 4,000 there. Never big enough to draw attention in a company doing 2.4 million in revenue. And he spaced them out. Some months, there were no fake invoices at all. Some months there were 2. He knew my cash flow patterns better than I did. The reason it worked for 3 years was because I trusted him. I didn't look at individual line items. I looked at the bottom of the report, and I looked at the quarterly profit, and if those numbers were where I expected them to be, I moved on with my life. Dennis knew that. He had built his whole system around the fact that I wouldn't look. Karen asked me if I wanted to involve the police, or if I wanted to handle it civilly. I asked her what she recommended. She said if it were my business, I'd call the police, but I'd do it on my terms. So, that's what I did. I called Dennis and told him I needed to meet in person on a Thursday morning at my office to discuss some questions I had about the quarterly report. He said, of course. He showed up at 9 a.m. in the grey cardigan. Karen was there, sitting in the chair next to my desk. A detective from the Raleigh Police Financial Crimes Unit was there, in the conference room, waiting. Dennis sat down and smiled and asked what my questions were. I slid a single piece of paper across the desk to him. It was an invoice from the fake attorney in Charlotte. I asked him to tell me about it. He looked at it for maybe 6 seconds. Then he looked up at me, and the color was gone from his face. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me. And I realized, sitting there across from him, that he knew exactly what was happening, and he had probably known this day was coming. The detective even came out of the conference room. He just started talking. He said his wife's treatments had wiped them out. He said their insurance had stopped covering the experimental drug she was on 2 years ago, and it was $40,000 a month out of pocket. He said he had started small, meaning to pay it back, and then it had gotten away from him. He said he was sorry. He said he had been planning to tell me. He said a lot of things. I don't remember most of them. I remember his hands were on the desk and they weren't shaking at all. Mine were under the desk, where he couldn't see. The detective came out and arrested him in my office. They didn't handcuff him. They just asked him to come with them. He stood up and he looked at me and he said, "I'm sorry, Michael." And then he left. He was charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and tax evasion. He pled guilty. He got 4 years in federal prison, of which he served 26 months. The court ordered him to pay restitution, and I've received, to date, about $11,000 of the $187,000 he took. His assets weren't what he claimed they were. The money was mostly gone. A lot of it went to medical bills. Some of it, I later learned, went to a condo in Myrtle Beach that was in his sister's name. His wife died while he was in prison. I know because I saw the obituary. I almost sent flowers. Then I didn't. My insurance covered about 60% of the loss under my crime coverage policy, which I hadn't known I had. Karen helped me file the claim. She also audited me every quarter for the next 2 years, free of charge, because she said she wanted to make sure I slept at night. I think she also felt a little responsible, even though she shouldn't have. Nothing about what Dennis did was her fault. I don't hate him. I wanted to. For a long time I tried to. But when I think about him now, what I feel mostly is a kind of tired sadness. A man who spent 37 years being meticulous and careful and boring. And in the end, he couldn't save his wife, and he took from someone who trusted him because he had nowhere else to turn. That doesn't make it okay. Nothing makes it okay. But I understand it. In a way, I wish I didn't. I hired a new accountant. She's 29 years old and aggressive, and she asks me hard questions every month. I answer them. I look at every line item now. I don't trust anyone to watch my money for me. Not completely. Not ever again. The thing nobody tells you about being stolen from by someone you trust is that the money is the smallest part of it. The money you can replace. The part you can't replace is the version of yourself that used to believe people. If this story hit you, subscribe. Every case on this channel starts with trust and ends with the truth.